So, in the last week or so, I've been diving down this rabbit hole that is photogrammetry. It's been blowing my mind, and people have been asking what I'm doing, how do I do this? So, this is my workflow. It's really simple. This is the process I've been going through. It's not perfect. I really don't know what I'm doing, but I did it this way and got some pretty sweet results. So I made these photos of my red in my driveway. I uploaded them to Instagram. People kind of freaked out. They're like, are these photos? Are these 3D renders that you did? Since when are you a visual effects artist? And I'm not, right? I'm a photographer. I know how to shoot things and I know how to light things. So I just want to show you guys how to do that. So I shot this in my driveway with my 5D Mark IV with a 50mm lens. I shot 500 photos, just kind of walking all around it, getting as much information as I could. I imported all of those photos into Lightroom and then just kind of did some batch pre-processing here. I saved some highlights, I upped some shadows, just giving them as much information as I could with the photos. A note here in the shooting process part of this, shooting this in a really soft lit kind of way, a really globally lit, just really soft light is super important here, so that your model doesn't have shadows already on it. So that we can light it ourselves. So I did this in the shade in my driveway, right? But the photos themselves have the driveway, they have the sky, they have grass, right? A lot of noisy information. In the future, ideally, I'm going to figure out how to shoot this in a less noisy environment. There's a different method called the turntable method where you just rotate the object and keep your camera in the same spot and kind of raise and lower it. I'll explore that in the future at some point. The program that I'm using is called Metashape. I'm just using a free 30-day trial, and it's pretty intuitive to kind of use here. So the first thing I do is import all of the photos and then go over to this chunk and align the photos. I don't think I actually showed it in this video, but there's a little camera icon kind of in that top bar on the far right. You can click that and actually see where the photos are mapped, and it's actually really cool. So when aligning the photos, the first thing it does is it builds what's called a sparse point cloud. And so these are just features that the program found in each image that it thought kind of went where it put them. And it built this really basic geometry of this object. Just kind of tooling around here, I can see all of these dots kind of all around my object, right? And that's the noise that I was talking about. It's the sky, it's the driveway. I don't want any of that stuff. So one of the first things I do in here actually is delete all of that other information and just try to keep my object as simple as possible. So to delete most of those points, I actually go over here to the circle selection tool and then select my object. And then I just invert that selection and delete all of those extra points. I still have some of those kind of extra floating points there. So I use the freeform selection tool and just grab all of that extra stuff and get it out of there. It just adds to the rendering time and I just don't want it in my model. So the next step in the process here is building that dense cloud. I'm not gonna lie, I chose the high setting here and this took about 4 hours. I have a 2019 MacBook Pro. I have a Radeon Vega Pro graphics card. And yeah, it just, that's something to kind of note here. Kind of do some tests, see, what's the resolution you need to do here to get kind of photorealistic stuff. I'm still doing tests and kind of figuring this out. This is just what I did, and I got some pretty sweet results with it. So if we go over here and click these kind of 9 dots next to those 4, this is that dense cloud, right? And you can immediately see, whoa, like look at all this noise. I don't want any of that, right? Like, this isn't our model quite yet. This is still a dense cloud. So if you zoom in, you'll just see kind of more densely packed dots here. So I actually took like another hour or so and deleted all of these extra points. That's just not stuff I want. I don't really know how necessary it was to delete every single individual point. I didn't get all of them. I just kind of did as much cleaning as I thought was necessary. Again, I don't know exactly how far to go, how little to do. Still kind of like working through all of that. Next, we're going to build our mesh, right? This is the actual object that we're going to build now. I did a face count of 1 million here. And so, another thing to kind of mess around with, maybe I should do less next time. I kind of figured my red was kind of awkward geometry, so I needed maybe a little bit more faces, but I was a little scarred from the 4-hour render on the high of the dense cloud, so I just did medium here, and it was plenty fine for me, I think. So we can actually go in here and view our model, right? This is our object. It's just a polygon mesh, you know, a bunch of triangles and vertices, and it's pretty cool to see your object this way. And yeah, so a note is that this isn't the textured model yet. You know, my photos that I took aren't actually painted onto this. This is just the geometry, right? This is just the structure of my object. You know, ideally, I would actually take this model from here and go into a different program and kind of buff it out. I don't know how to sculpt. I don't know how to do any of that. I'm just letting this program kind of do all of the work here. And I'm trying to shoot it in the most ideal way that I can. In the future, I'll more than likely have to actually go in and kind of buff that stuff out. You know, if I want to do actual legit work with this, I don't want kind of all of these weird messed up kind of holes and areas. But yeah, so next here, I'm going to build this texture. I just did a 4K texture. Again, I messed these settings. I don't really know what's ideal as far as like the best possible texture, the best possible mesh. Yeah, just kind of figuring that out as I go here. So we can go here, select our texture, and here it is, right? Here's our model with the texture, right? The photos that we took kind of wrapped around the geometry. And it really kind of blew me away the first time I saw this. I really didn't think it was going to look this good. I thought it was going to be pixelated, or I don't know, just not as high resolution as this actually turned out. You know, there's plenty of areas as you zoom in here that are kind of funky, but you know, I'm just kind of testing this out. I'm seeing what's the best way to do this. I actually got some tight photos that, you know, I realized the depth of field on the edges of those images. The program actually used some of those soft parts to kind of paint in here. You can go in and mask that stuff out before you paint that texture in, because, you know, you don't want any of that. You know, and as I look around here, you can see kind of these weird kind of crunchy areas. That's why it's really important to, in the beginning at least, find an ideal object to shoot. This red has a bunch of texture. It has a bunch of feature points to kind of lock into. But right, like the emblem and the record button on the front there, they get a little funky because they're kind of clear, and it's, you know, the program kind of struggles to build the geometry of that. But again, you know, that wouldn't be too crazy to go in and kind of buff that out. The final kind of thing here is to export the model. I'm using Blender, so I'm just gonna export an object, just a .obj. These are the settings that I used. I used a TIFF for the texture. I don't really know why. I thought it was, you know, lossless and going to be better than a JPEG. I haven't tested anything else there, but this is just what I did. So full disclosure here, I really don't know how to use Blender. So, you know, if you don't, perfect, right? It's pretty intuitive, and it's really not that hard to kind of figure out the tools and just kind of the layout and how to move around in it. You know, I'm doing some pretty basic stuff here. So the first thing I'm going to do in here is delete everything and then import my object. So here we are. If you know Blender, I'm probably going to butcher a lot of this stuff, but this is just what I've been doing. I align my origin, the geometry to the origin here. And then I go over here and select this tool and just kind of rotate it around and get it kind of upright up on this plane here. And yeah, these kind of 4 little circles and spheres on the top right, I kind of use those a lot, or not use those, but kind of click through those a lot to look at different versions, not versions, but different views of my model, right? Like the wireframe, just the model itself with the texture on it. I would for sure say, you know, just explore kind of Blender, the drop downs in here. You know, you can kind of put a panoramic picture in here and around your object and see how that picture, you know, lights the object itself. And that's kind of cool. You know, that's nothing I'm really interested in right now as of this moment. You know, I want to light this myself. So the first thing I do here is I go into this world tab and just kind of bring it all down, kind of darken it up. Then I'm going to add a light, and the light I'm going to use is just an area light. I'm just going to raise it up, and you know, you can already kind of see, like, there it is, kind of doing something. Like I said, this is all pretty intuitive, right? I don't know Blender. I don't know how to really do any of this stuff. I just know how lights work, right? So I know I need this thing to be brighter. So I'm going to go into this light tab, and I need it to be bigger, right? I want this to kind of be a nice, big, soft source. Again, doing this for the first time, I was kind of mind blown. I was like, oh my gosh, like this is so easy, right? And you know, the ability to just go in here and like this, like that's amazing. Another kind of tip here, with your area light selected, go into that object constraint and then track that to your red. Click Z, go into Y. You know, again, I don't really know what I'm doing. I just figured out this is the way to do this, right? So when you move your light around, it actually stays pointed towards your object. I know that a lot of this goes by pretty quick, so just kind of like go by frame and see how I did that, and like the settings that I'm using here. Again, it's all pretty straightforward. Once you kind of do it once, you just kind of know exactly how to do it again and again. It's really not that complicated. So the next thing I'm going to do here is add another light. I'm going to choose this point light here. You know, from here on out, I'm just kind of lighting. So, you know, you can kind of fast forward through this, you know, kind of tool around yourself. I'm not really going to go in depth on how to do this. Just kind of, I guess, watch if you don't know how. Just kind of pick up what I'm doing. You can actually kind of go over here in this top right and hide the lights and hide the objects and whatnot, and that's going to be kind of important later. I also burnt myself doing that, and I'll explain that at some point. So we're going to add this camera and kind of move it into a spot here and then track it to the red, track it to our object. You know, tracking this stuff makes this just way easier moving it around. And then we can actually go into this camera view and see what we're going to render. So on the kind of right hand side here, there's all of these tabs. These are what we're going to use basically the whole time to kind of add different properties and whatnot. We're actually going to change our render engine to cycles instead of Eevee. And like in the kind of top right there with those little spheres, those balls, that far right one is going to be basically what we're going to render. I believe this is called look dev. I'm not sure. I'm probably totally butchering that. But right, like, so that's kind of how you see basically what you're going to render here. So I'm just going to find a different perspective here. And what's cool is you can actually go to view, align view, and then you can align the camera to where you are. Sometimes that's easier than moving the camera actually itself. And we can kind of go over here to the right, and then we can change the resolution, really more the aspect ratio of this. Also, definitely don't forget to save. So also you can go up to the top right here and select your camera and then hit G and then kind of click and kind of fine tune where you want to be. I actually tracked the camera to the object. So if you click R, you're supposed to be able to rotate your camera. Since I tracked it, I actually can't do that right here. So that's just a side note. You could go into that object constraint and then delete that so you can rotate this, or you could just rotate the object itself. I'm going to add another light here and then add that tracking constraint. Again, it just makes things so much easier to kind of move the light around and not have to kind of rotate it and point it at the object. You know, sometimes you don't want that, but I enjoyed doing that. It kind of made things easier for me. Again, so easy to light in Blender. You know, you can change the color, change the power, change the size. You can actually change this area light to a point light to get some kind of harsher shadows going on here. Also, you can actually go in and turn off the floor, turn off the X and Y axis, and kind of turn off all of these other points here. Again, just kind of click through the video here as I go along and kind of toggle this stuff on and off. Just kind of see, you know, what does what. I just wanted to see what's the cleanest view I can actually get here. And then I actually wanted to bring my background down. I just wanted to make it totally black. I went back into the world and then just lowered that color all the way to black. I then kind of moved the lights around, just situated everything, got my camera where I wanted it, and then I changed the focal length actually, which is again kind of cool. You can actually go into the depth of field on the bottom right there, and you know, you can use lenses that don't exist, which is crazy, right? I can use a 19mm lens with a 0.5 aperture. Again, just kind of fine tuning stuff here, finishing the lights, finishing where I want this camera for this first render. I'm going to talk about the render settings here in a little bit. These are the settings that I used. Right, I did this 2000 by 2000 resolution. I kept the renderer with cycles the whole time, and I just used 128 sample steps. I also actually went in here and added denoising. I realized kind of early on this is helpful in some ways. Again, just kind of testing stuff here. I did this and it gave me some nice clean results. Unfortunately, I'm using Apple, and so I don't have an NVIDIA card, so I actually have to just render this on my CPU, which is kind of crazy. So, that's something to also think about. If you have a Windows machine or, you have a NVIDIA GPU, then this would go a lot faster. Not that this actually took that long, right? So here we are. This first render just took, what is that, a minute? You can kind of see that time there in the top left. So, that's not that bad at all. As you add more and more lights or haze or things like that, that render time is going to go up. So another important note here, this is saved to slot 1 on that kind of top right corner there. This isn't saved yet. You actually have to go in here and save it. I'm just going to save this as a TIFF because that's just what I did. I don't know. These are the settings I used. I went into Lightroom. I just wanted to see, how flexible is this file? And it's super flexible, right? I was kind of shocked. I was like, wow, this looks like a photo that I took. I keep finding myself talking about this to people and saying, comparing this to the quote unquote real photos I took or take. And, what's the difference here, right? I'm just rendering pixels to a file. There's really no difference. And, the higher resolution you use, the more and more kind of, sharp and accurate this starts looking. But still, even at 2000 by 2000 resolution, there's a lot going on here, and it looks almost indistinguishable from a photo that I quote unquote actually took. So I'm going to choose a different vantage point here, change my resolution to 4000 by 4000, and go into this slot 2, and then render this again. We can kind of see here the difference, that 2000 by 2000 versus the 4000 by 4000, twice as big. Let's see what this looks like. How long does this take to render? This ended up taking 5 minutes to render. Again, not too bad. And yeah, I can kind of zoom in now and actually see some impressive detail. Yeah, and you can actually see. So that's what I was talking about earlier with the model, right? I should have gone in and kind of buffed that out. I didn't. I just wanted to see what was happening. What can I do with this? What's the most basic, simple way I can do this workflow? And I really do think this is kind of it. So I wanted to get a different photo. I didn't want this floating on black. How could I shoot this on like a seamless? So I just looked up, how do I do this? Basically, you just add a plane, and then you click S, and then drag, click and drag to make this thing as big as you want. And then you're going to click Tab to go into edit mode. And then you're going to go up there in the top left and select the edge selection. And I'm going to click that back edge. And then I'm going to click E, and that lets me move it up and down. And then I'm going to click Z to just move it straight up and down. And then I'm just going to raise that as high as I think I need that. Then I'm just going to kind of move that background back. And this is just a wall, right? If I just wanted this to look like a room, this is great, but I want this to be a nice curve. Again, I just looked this up. Blender has a huge open source community, so many tutorials online. If you have an idea for something, guarantee someone has a tutorial on it. So if you want to make this seamless, just look it up on YouTube, how to make a seamless in Blender, and you'll probably watch the same thing that I did to do this. Again, going in here, just kind of moving my object around, kind of relighting this, seeing, what's a moody thing I could do here. I actually learned this the hard way early on. In the top right, those little eye icons, you can toggle the lights off and on in a way, but if you render an image with those lights off, like with a couple lights off, it actually renders that with those on. It doesn't actually hide those in the render. I'm sure there's a way to do that. I just don't know how right now, right? Like I don't know how to really use Blender, but somehow I ended up with these images that I like. So for this render, I'm going to make this 8000 by 8000 resolution. And then I'm actually going to go over into the scene tab, and I think I was going to change the render steps to 256. I kept that at 128, but I did change that integrator, right? That's what it says, right? Yeah, integrator to branched path. And that basically kind of lets the light bounce around, and it just gives you a more accurate representation of how the light interacts within the scene. So, there's a lot of different things you can do here. Again, just kind of test, mess around, render out a bunch of different stuff. This render actually took quite a while. I think it took like an hour, 8,000 by 8,000 with kind of a, all of these lights going on my CPU again, right? Like I'm just rendering this on my CPU. Like that's super cringeworthy, but it is what it is. Going over here and looking at the files after all of these renders, that first file at 2000 by 2000 is 32 megabytes. That next one's 128 megabytes, at 4000 by 4000. And then that last one is 500 megabytes. So there's so much information in these photos. And it just kind of took me by surprise. I didn't think that I was going to have all of this information, all of this kind of range and this flexibility within the files. They're just like any photo you take, right? You can do a lot with these, and I don't know, I was super impressed. And obviously a lot of people who were asking about this stuff were kind of surprised too that it's so hard to call these fake. Like there's really not a lot about this that is fake. These are real photos that I took of my red. I just had the ability to move it around, right? It's a dynamic image, this kind of 3D photography. I'm surprised I couldn't find a lot about it. I couldn't find a lot of people doing this stuff. I can see this application for things like product photography. Again, kind of back to earlier on, shooting ideal objects is really important, right? Like I tried to shoot a can on my driveway, like literally sitting on my driveway with my iPhone X, and I shot like 200 photos of it, and I got a pretty trash result. I just wanted to test the limits, see what's the least amount of photos I could do or the least resolution, and in also messing with materials, right? How does this work with a can? How does this work with glass? And it's actually kind of difficult, right? Like if you wanted to shoot like a glass bottle, you would probably have to put some trackers on it. You'd have to put some stickers, something to give the program points of reference, right? This feature is the same feature in all of these images, so it can actually build that geometry, right? Like with this can, there's all of these holes and whatnot. It didn't know what was what. It just all kind of felt like one thing in these orange areas and on the top of the can. So, that's something to kind of think about. There are limits here, but you can get clever and figure out how to shoot things in ideal ways so that you can build the right geometry and paint that texture on there. And then, you can go further and re-sculpt stuff. And yeah, I just think there's a lot of potential here. And I just wanted to show people this is how I do it. Again, I don't really know what I'm doing, but I think that's kind of the point of this. Someone who doesn't know what they're doing made this stuff that I think is pretty cool. So yeah, go out there, have fun, shoot some stuff, do some tests, and yeah, make some real fake images.